Hello, and welcome back to Conversation Corner, a post-October 7th professional series with the Jerusalem Post and Ono Academic College. I'm Tamar Oriel-Beery, and I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Tammy Hoffman, Head of the Education Policy Program at the Israel Democracy Institute, Martin Herskowitz, founder of Creating Memory, in memory of Holocaust survivors and Holocaust victims, and Rabbi Dr. Sharon Z. Shalom, Senior Lecturer and Director of the International Center for the Study of Ethiopian Jewry at Ono Academic College. Thank you, the three of you, for joining us today.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you for having us.
You know, each of you kind of studies a different sector that ultimately relates back to the subject of education. Education as a subject right now, post October 7th, it's something that's been completely thrown off balance since the war against Hamas and the Gaza Strip broke out. Nevertheless, these different, angles contribute different understandings of the situation currently to what's happening now, and ultimately what are the solutions to the current education crisis in Israel, if you will, from all different angles. So I'm going to start off just bouncing questions off of a few of you. Shalom, I want to start with you. Israel is a multicultural country. I think that's fair to say. Here they call it the melting pot, right? Its people came from near and far to form a Jewish state. However, many say that the Ethiopian community in Israel is regularly sectioned off and left out of this melting pot system. Do you see Israeli pluralism as successfully including the Israeli Ethiopian community as of right now?
Yeah, thank you very much. And I appreciate very, very much this conversation going to be very amazing and very important. So thank you very much. I just want to start with, with my experience, what happened to me in October 7th. Immediately after the Shabbat Simchat Torah, on Saturday evening, I received a call from my army commander. And I want to tell you, my Miluim, what's called in Hebrew Miluim, my serve duty is to inform the families of the fallen that their dearest loved ones have been killed in Gaza. And I want to tell you, what I saw in this war did not even compare to what I saw in Sudan. As we know that in Sudan, 4,000 Ethiopian Jews was killed on the way to Israel. So it is crazy. And so the question is, what is the war? What happened? Why is more difficult to me to see this trauma in Israel? And from my opinion, what is, maybe in other words, what is mean in the danger of the Zionist enterprise in the continued existence of the state of Israel? I want to tell you, every little noise make people jump. Today I use a rabbi. I am also a rabbi in Holocaust in our community. And one Holocaust survivor told me, my mother used to tell me, when there is a pogrom, run away. Don't try to fight. Now I am being chased in my own country. I live in here. Where will I flee to? I have I don't know how to go. I am living in my house. So when I was in Sudan, I was in my way, and this trauma happened in Medinat Israel, and this is more and more challenging time. And so, while we are on the topic, I would like to express my love to all the families who lost their love once and after, and we offer a prayer for the return of the hostages from Gaza, Be'ezat Hashem. We pray for all this prayer. But now I go back to your question. The state of Israel is a miracle. First of all, we have to understand the state of Israel is a miracle. The achievement of the state of Israel in all fields are amazing, in a many fields, including immigration, absorption, economic, medicine, and security. Is amazing. It's a miracle. And just alone with this, there were also many mistakes. Also, of course, there is a lot of mistake. I used to say, by the way, a person who does not make mistakes does not do anything. Israel has done a lot. The Ethiopian community is a good example of the process that Israel society is going through. There is no doubt that after the Aliyah of Ethiopian Jewish, Israel has become a living museum of Jewish living in one place and representing different period and culture. The distinction are expressed in nationality, religion, language, political opinion, and culture. Let me to say that something changed in this world. During this war, something changed, and the sacrifice of Ethiopian Israeli soldiers, together with soldiers from other groups, has unified society. Something changed. Arabic Israeli soldiers, Jewish, non-Jewish, and left and right, and everything together fall, and this makes them to be together. And in this world, unfortunately, over 26 soldiers and policemen among Ethiopian Jews community were killed, and this is a very high percentage. So
proportionately to the size of the Ethiopian Israeli community, you're saying?
of course, yes.
Yeah, no,
And
I think that something broadly recognized is that the horrific trauma of this war and how it's impacted several sub-communities of Israel has brought ultimately the state together. I think it was a Bedouin community leader who said that Bedouin soldiers bleed like Jewish soldiers. So I think that impact is a very good point, in that the most horrific situations, the most traumatic situations, that recall some of the biggest impacts that we felt in our lives in a negative sense, can ultimately bring the community together. Tammy, I want to turn this to you. What are the biggest successes and the biggest failures, in your opinion, of the Israeli school system since the outbreak of the war, in kind of encapsulating the situation, in kind of facing these challenges that were created from this, original big hit that October 7th was?
So first of all, thank you for this opportunity and this conversation. I will say that, first of all, the Israeli education system enters the trauma of October 7th, facing decades of challenges. It is not free of problems, mistake, challenges, and I'll mention two of them specifically, and I think they're very relevant to the question you are asking now about the after. First of all is the achievement gap and the gaps between different sectors in society in terms of, equity of education, access to education opportunities. So because, from the beginning, at least for the 25, 30 years, it's very obvious that we do have a problem of equality of opportunity for different sectors, and there are it does go in line with socioeconomic gaps and states, and also cultural, national, religious, sectors. So going into the war in that state what happened in the aftermath is that all of these problems became worse. Right? So, of course, once the war erupted and the horrible events of the 7th of October, you have the first phase of just a minute to see what's going on two levels. The first one is, of course, all the evacuated students, in schools, and trying to maintain or restore some kind of maybe a normative way of going back to school as much as it can be, and it's a problem until today. On the other level is bringing back all of the education system back to function. So it took about a few weeks and few months in order to do that. But I think in order for the education system to become part of the solution of a healing society, it cannot be the problem. And we are going into these times that we're here, this period. And I want to challenge 9 months after 7th of October, I want to challenge the idea of unification or unity. About a month ago, the Knesset has passed the National Unity Law that wants to strengthen the idea of unity, and Professor Shalom has mentioned a lot of feeling of unity with the fighting and the reserve, and really the feeling of coming together in order to face the trauma. And I identify with that, certainly for the first stage of the war. But as the time goes by, we see some kind of normalization of the state we are in terms of political, the education, we talk about the matriculation, and we are not facing part of the root problems that not bring together all sectors of society. And to start with the fact that the way the education system is built, not from today, from its inception, in sectorial, different, you have a situation where all of the students of Israel, when they finish high school, they finish the 12 year, the K-12, they don't really have a shared ethos. You have communities, but they don't have a shared ethos. And in order to come together into the healing process, you have to have something. It doesn't have to be, we don't have to agree about everything, but something needs to be there in order to allow a group to become a state and a society. Now,
I just don't know if that kind of thing exists abroad, for example. Like usually when it comes to Israel being behind in certain sectors, there's some kind of example from abroad that we can take that teaches us about how we should proceed with things. But I personally have been to school both in Israel and abroad, and I felt that sense of connection, I guess, far more in Israel than I did, say, in the US.
Well, I think, first of all, I don't think it's a unique problem to Israel, but it does have its unique characteristics, being a nation state for the Jewish people, where the whole issue of a Jewish democratic state, okay, so now we can talk about what do we mean Jewish. We do it on a religious term, on a cultural and historic term. Talk about a democratic. We know what happens, in the last 2 years, but this has also, a history of debate of what do we mean by a democratic system. So all of these don't go away, and I think they are unique to the state of Israel, also because of the security threats and that we are facing for many, many years, and
Right.
especially
It's
now.
also hard to detach from a very intense and centralized shared history. While we're like we said, we're from a bunch of different countries. We pull a bunch of different histories together, I think there's a lot in Hebrew you say like a tzira meshutaf, right? Like the joint axis of history that does nevertheless create a foundation that just, I guess, needs to be rooted more thoroughly, especially in the education system. Martin, I want to turn to you because one of those, central points in the shared axis, of course, is the horrific massacre of millions and millions of Jews in Europe and what we now recognize as the Holocaust. Comparisons of what Israel endured on October 7th to the Holocaust have been wrapped in controversy since the event took place. However, trauma has been a hot subject when it comes to the war. What, in your opinion, can the people of Israel learn from the intergenerational trauma from the Holocaust when it comes to dealing with an unprecedented massacre like what we dealt with on October 7th?
My family lived under German occupation for 5 years before they were transported to Auschwitz. And during that time, they were wonderfully resilient. They were caring one for each other. They were a community. And no one talks about those 5 years. They all talk about the few months that they were in Auschwitz, even a few seconds. Some of my relatives came to Auschwitz, and within an hour were already in the crematoriums and dead. So they talk about the 1 hour that they were in Auschwitz instead of talking about the 5 years of resilience, of community, of strength. And I think that the best example of this is the Dapeh the witness sheets that are given out talk about how these people died and who died and what day they died. And it doesn't talk about how they lived. So if I were to say how we should remember the people who died on October 7th, it's not important to document so much how they lived and how they died and where they died and the terrible atrocities that happened when they died. I think it's important that we pay attention to how they lived and who they were and what we can learn from. I heard Sarit Zussman, and it's amazing. I mean, Ben Zussman, I'm sure he died a hero, but how he lived was even more heroic. And so if we're going to learn from Holocaust memory, we have to learn that what we've done and the focus on the horrors of the death, the ideology, the politicism is not the way to go. The way to go is with compassion, with connectedness to these people, to how they lived, and not so much to stop talking about how they died.
Right. I think it comes a lot also from like a personal putting yourself in these horrific places, right? Because you think about it, and what do you want to be remembered by? Do you want to be remembered by how you were savagely murdered, or do you want to be remembered for the things that you dedicated your life to? I think that makes a lot of sense. Now, Martin, you and Sharon have a joint project on how the tools of Holocaust education can be applied to the traumatic experiences of Ethiopian Jews. In short, I want to hear from both of you. Let us know what your conclusions are.
You heard Sharon talk about the 4,000 people who died. It's a terrible amount of people, and we know so little about it because basically the survivors from Sudan were very much like my parents, that they said, okay, let's put the past behind us, let's not talk about it, and let's focus on the future. And so they told they let the trauma stay there, and the trauma is still there. Trauma is still inside, and it's affecting the future generations. And so I saw the second generation of the Ethiopian community very much like I was as a second generation, where my parents were silent and said, forget about the past. And I said, in order for me to create the society I want, and to be the person I want, I have to process the trauma. So I came to Sharon, and we did a program together about healing and trauma, in which Sharon read one of my poems talking about my attempt to deal with the disconnect between my mother by eating soup, by eating her soup. And he, in the middle of the poem, he stopped and he couldn't continue on because he was so filled with the identification of how the disconnect between my mother and I also reflected on his own disconnect, that he was told, oh, your mother's not Jewish enough. She's not halakhic enough. You have to become Israeli, stop being old style. And now this whole generation is realizing, I want to connect back to who these people are, to my roots, to my connectedness. So I think that Holocaust remembrance is about connectedness, and a lot of what we have to reconnect the second generation of Ethiopians back to their rich traditions.
Marty, this this is my privilege, and I'm very happy that we are work together. And actually, I can say we are brothers. From you are second generation of Holocaust, and I second generation, maybe first generation from Holocaust of Sudan. So, I read your song, I began to cry, because for many years I felt, inferior to my tradition, to my parents. Okay, and I tried to go far from my parents because I want to involve and integrate into Israeli society. And when I read your song, I began to cry, because you remind me my background, my history. And I want to tell you, there is, of course, a lot of disappointment here when we arrive here. Suddenly, the rabbinate told us that we are not Jewish, and we're looking after recognition about our culture, about our Judaism. And finally, when I met Martin, I understood that we have to go back to our home, to roots of our parents, and everything began from our home, to be proud of ourselves. So the question, and finally I understand a lot of value which exists among our culture, among Israeli religion, Ethiopian Jewish culture, philosophy. It's amazing, amazing. For example, there is, hope. Hope is very, very important. So, if we disappointment from what's going on here, so we can go to despair, huge, and on other hand, we can create a new hope. So the story of Holocaust survivor and the story of the Ethiopian Jewish can provide us today with a secret of hope to keep going and not stop. And it's very, very important after October 7. So together we're going to create it. And now, Martin, you can explain our project. Very amazing. If you want the last, our project. If you can explain, please, you can give. Martin.
Basically, the project is that to have the people who made Aliyah as children, and who the second generation, to allow them to create a personal narrative about the trauma and to process the trauma, very much like the second generation of Holocaust processes. So we're asking them to use the creative process, because the creative process, it's a shortcut to the emotions, a shortcut to memory, it's a shortcut to resilience. And so by using this creative process, by asking them to write about their experience, the good and the bad, I think it will help them. And we hope to publish the book later this year, and to show the new way, the way where we're not cut off from our past, but we use the past in order to build our resilience.
Amazing. I can't wait to read the book. Tammy, I want to tie you back into the conversation. The Ethiopian community is now sorely missing from Israel's education system, not necessarily in the classroom, of course, but when it comes to the required reading. We learn about the Holocaust, about pogroms, and about the mass killings throughout the Middle East, but we barely touch on Ethiopian Jewry and their extremely graphic history. With the supposed improved of tolerance and pluralism in Israel, how do you see this changing in the future? What needs to be done?
Well, first of all, if I'm looking at I think there are two places for curriculum where you can see different experience of different sectors. So first of all, for many years, the whole point of view, and Martin mentioned Ben Zion Dinur before, was very, very Eurocentric and very, focusing on Europe and the Holocaust in Europe. And then with the years and with the changes in society, and also the debates and struggle in order to bring marginalized voices into the curriculum. So you started to hear about Holocaust in North Africa, in Tunis and in Louvre. You started to get that. And by the end of the 90s and beginning of the 2000s, you started to talk about also the heritage of Ethiopian Jews, both in noting the Sigd memory and also in the Jerusalem Day, the remembrance of going from Sudan, and of course the horrors that are applied to that. But I want to say something that is maybe you will judge if it's provocative or not. Okay. I think processing trauma is something that is really important, and I totally agree, Martin, that the balance between focusing on the death and focusing on the living and the way someone lived, and to give names to the horrors that happened, and also to talk about heritage and public history, is extremely important. And we put too much focus on the death and on traumas, where the heritage of all different Jewish communities, and of course also of the Ethiopian Jews and North Africa, and also in Europe or across the diaspora, have a lot of heritage that is much more than just the pogroms and the deaths that they encountered as parts. I mean, the shared story cannot be, the axis cannot be only on the issue of death and persecution. And I think in that area, we are lacking a lot. And it has all kinds of reasons, and it's not maybe the place to talk about them. And I think that part of the integration of Ethiopian Jews within the education system has to do also with understanding a more holistic picture of, of this, of the culture, of the heritage, of the story of coming to Israel, and also about the problems in, acceptance and the issues around it. I think you cannot separate that. And I think it's also the same about, you talked about the first, the survivors that came to Israel in 48 and 49 and were accepted in a way of maybe reluctant and were not having a voice, while I totally agree with you that the issue of resilience and clinging into life and bringing about is really, really important. And when we ignore that or put it aside, and I'm going back to today, we have a really major problem in allowing ourselves to come together in one place, but also to ask questions about how this coming together affects us, what kind of a society we want to be when looking ahead in the day that will come, I hope, soon after the war. And I want to refer to one of Israel's renowned philosophers of education, Tzvi Lam, that wrote a very little book that is less known than other things that he wrote about teaching and schools. It's called Education and War, and it was published in 1976 after the Yom Kippur War. And in that, in this little book, he says that, education at the outbreak of war has, of course, like a first aid role of correction, to help to put the kids, to learn and to help them and so forth. But after the first aid, or even together with the first aid, education must think and establish a system, infrastructure, thinking, a dialogue, some way to look, how do you go forward to the future in terms of how the future society will look, one. And the second thing is how you maybe tackle and prevent some of the things that also help to maybe put forth intolerance and racism and things that may be, supported some of the things that we are seeing today in the street, in the Knesset.
My concern about such a concept would be, and Sharon, I want to loop you into this conversation as well and get your thoughts on it. My concern is that inherently tying together the subject of representation on the one hand and on the other hand, the format in which it's done, is that bringing in Ethiopian history and education into the Israeli school system and doing so in a supposed reformed manner, while still being in the process of doing so for the other traumas that the Jewish community has faced, such as pogroms, such as the Holocaust, and so on and so forth, would inherently devalue Ethiopian representation in Israel's education system, because it wouldn't get that same place of mourning that the others have, had simply because of being a part of Israel's education for so long, right? Like, the pain of that isn't necessarily there, and although we've had that already with the Holocaust and with other such, genocides, really, bringing Ethiopian history into this education system without giving it that place might not give Ethiopian Jews that space of mourning in an academic context, I guess.
Tamar, this is exactly what Sharon and I addressed, because when we said we have to connect them to their past, we realized that there's no curriculums for it. So I have here, you probably can't see it, Ono came out, My Family, a Beta Israel curriculum, which is a school curriculum in English for the Jewish community in America to teach them about Ethiopian Jewry. And now we're working on a Hebrew version, so that, because when you ask them, okay, teach about Ethiopian, telling the teacher, you have to give them the materials. And Sharon wrote as an author, he wrote about the tradition, and from his writings, Ono and Johnny Solomon and I came up with this curriculum, and it came out in English, and it's coming out in Hebrew. Please talk about it, Sharon.
Ono College appointed me to found the world's first international center for the study of Ethiopian Jewry. In the years since we have worked tirelessly, to promote understanding of the culture, history, theology, challenges and success of Beta Israel. We want to give Israeli, as Martin mentioned, to give the Israeli, even to the American Jewish, present of making it a more pluralistic society by educating about the diverse aspect of Ethiopian Jewry that can, give everyone's us. I believe that Ethiopian Jews can represent a model of, for example, I can give you that Ethiopian Jews believe that the nature of human is good. How much is it very, very important for us today? Believe to human that they are good. So there is a lot of value which exists among Ethiopian Jewish community that is not only to get recognition by the Israeli, but Ethiopian Jews can give for the others a present to change the world. But let me to say, please, what is very, very important, what Ono Academic College do for this side. In this world, Israeli society is undergoing a process of realization. Israelization, process of Israelization. And we are coming to understand more and more that between the two models and concept of multi-melting pot and multiculturalism, there is solidarity. We began to understand the special value of each group and the special place each group occupy in the mosaic of Israeli society. All group is in Israel society, Israeli Arabs, Sfaradi, Ashkenazi, ultra-Orthodox, and what's called Tzionut Datit. After this word, we can talk about, let me to say, about finally, Israeli nation, Ha'uma Israeli. Something changed after October 7, Ha'uma Israeli. And let me to say that Ono Academic College, founded 20 years ago, realized that the really word is to build the Israeli nation, is to establish a society of solidarity is through equal education for all. And I'm very excited to say that since a lot of Ethiopian Jewish, which they graduate from this college. By the way, this is a very, very special project which established by Orech Din, lawyer Zev Kasso. Okay, and this is a very amazing, very unique program for that since a lot of thousands of students have graduated, and we can find them today in every place in the Israeli society, in Knesset, and lawyers, and everything, something changed. And this is, for example, how we can change the face of Israeli society, to recognize for each group and understand that each group have a very unique place in Israeli society, and what 7 October can give us today to Israeli society. Ono Academic College understood this since 26 years ago.
Amazing. Rabbi Dr. Sharon Shalom, Martin Herskowitz, Dr. Tammy Hoffman, thank you all so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.